Today we're going to be taking a look at some mining hash rates on the Intel Arc line of GPUs. In particular, we're going to be using the A750 Limited Edition, and we're also going to be using the ASRock Challenger A380. So right off the bat, if we hop over to Newegg, we can see the A380, which is more of a ITX graphics card, and that's going to be their entry lineup. It's currently around $120 for this card. 6 gigs of DDR6. And if we hop on over to the A750, which you can see is currently back ordered, but this is mainly because they were running a deal. You could actually get this card for $225, which is a phenomenal price for this type of graphics card. And so they recently dropped the price to $250 and they're doing a promo. You could buy up to 5 at $225 a pop on Newegg. And so they went out of stock, but they should be getting more stock in pretty soon. Intel is overstocked with this GPU in pretty much all of their distribution centers, and they're trying to offload that excess inventory. They were going to do a refresher of this card, but because they have so much excess inventory, they decided they're not going to do the refresher. They're just going to keep with this card until the next gen. Now, before we take a look at specific hash rates, there are a couple caveats to this. One is the Intel graphics drivers are only available in the latest Linux kernel, which means you would either need to do a fresh install of like Ubuntu, or wait until Hive OS releases an update to the kernel. It will require a full kernel revamp because I think Hive OS right now is still on 5.10 kernel, and it requires, I think, 6.2. So it does require that latest kernel in order to fully function. Or what you can do is actually what I've done, and that is run them in Windows. All right, we're now remoted into that Intel rig that is basically my test bench for these two cards. Hop over to display adapters. Here we can see we have an A380, we have an A750. If we fire up GPU Z, what we can see is, let's go to the 380 first. And here you can see it's an ASRock Challenger. Now, it is a X8 speed on the actual card. However, I have it on a riser right now in an X1 slot. I did some testing. The X1 slot actually has the same exact speed, if not higher, than the X10 slots direct on the board. So that's good news. You're not getting any performance degradation by running it on risers. Now, this was a AM4 motherboard. One of the things I had to do is it does require resizable bar. If you don't do resizable bar, it will detect one graphics cards in Windows, won't be able to mine on it, and if you try to put a second, Windows won't even really detect the second. It'll go into a failed state, similar to how like the Radeon 7s would go into a code 43. That's what will happen for all subsequent GPUs. Your motherboard has to include the option to turn on resizable bar. Almost all modern motherboards have resizable bar capabilities, but a lot of them don't even have the option in the BIOS to flip it. And if you can't flip it, you're really not going to be able to use this. So just keep that in mind. In my case, I'm using a MSI B450 Tomahawk, and I had to install the latest BIOS, which was released a couple months ago, in order to even activate that resizable bar option. Now if we hop over to the A750, we can see this has 8 gigs of DDR6. So we're good here. Windows is detecting the full allotment of memory. However, if we open up the miners, and in this case I'm just going to pull up SRB miner, because it has a list devices option that kind of gives you an idea here. And what you're going to notice is not all the memory is usable. In fact, a substantial amount is not usable. So on the 8 gig card, we only have 6.4 gigs available of VRAM. And the big detriment here is on the A380, which has a 6 gig card, we only have 4.8 gigs available. This means you're not going to be able to mine things like the latest Ethereum forks. ETHW, Ethereum Fair, anything with a high memory requirement, you're not going to be able to mine on these. Hopefully this gets unlocked. GPU-Z detects the correct amount of VRAM. The cards have the correct amount of VRAM. It's just something to be aware of. Now if we hop on over to the miner list, I went through and tested pretty much most of the miners, and I only came up with 4 miners that really work. One of these miners is several years old. So the first one is LLL miner. Does work. Tested this with 1.71, which is the latest version. In fact, all these miners are the latest versions. Next up is Nano Miner. Nano Miner was actually the first miner, I believe, to have Intel Arc support. It actually works pretty good. So Nano Miner's on here. LLL Miner was the second. SRB Miner is the newest one to have Intel Arc support. Doesn't support it on all the algorithms, but it does have substantial support. The other thing that also works is VertHash Miner. So VertHash Miner was kind of the miner that was built strictly for mining VertHash, and they made it in a way that it basically works with all CUDA and OpenCL cards. Intel runs on an OpenCL driver, and so that miner's actually able to mine on the card, which is fantastic. In most cases, a lot of miners, even like Team Red Miner that's OpenCL, they actually have a check for the card, and if it's not in kind of the list of cards that they think should be supported by their miner, it just kicks it as an invalid device. With the case with VertHash Miner, it can pretty much mine on anything. If we hop on over to the spreadsheet, now these are basically all of the hash rates. I went through and I tested pretty much every algorithm on all those miners and came up with the average hash rates for each of those cards. And one of the things you're going to notice here is the A750 greatly excels at dual mineable coins, where you're using the memory and the core at the same time. In the past, especially with like the 3000 series and the AMD 6000 series, we saw where you could dual mine those, but you would lose, a decent amount on one coin in order to mine the other. The nice thing with the Intel Arcs is you really don't have that limit. One other thing I do want to mention is right now there's no tuning on the Arc GPUs, meaning MSI Afterburner doesn't work. Their own tuning program doesn't really work. And so all that you can do is kind of adjust the power limit on the cards. You can't even adjust fan speed or anything like that. So all of these hash rates are at stock levels, and I didn't mess with any of the power limits. Essentially, it's just going to move efficiency a little bit, either up or down, based on if you want to adjust that power limit. So these are essentially stock hash rates for both of the cards. Alright, so we're going to start out with a lithium, and this is if you only mine a lithium using SRB miner. On the A380, we got 425 mega hashes per second. On the A750, it's 1.5 gigahashes a second. This is a really nice number, especially at that 225 to 250 price point. I'm personally mining lithium with my A750. Phenomenal hash rate on that side. Beam actually works using LLL miner. Now, this is one of the things you're going to see is it couldn't mine on the A380 because there's no kernel support. There is kernel support for the A750, but not the A380. So as time goes along, as developers, continue to make improvements to the miner, continue to build the binaries that are needed to run the kernels for these devices, we should see more A380 support in the future. This was not limited by memory at all. But we did get 28 hashes per second on the A750. Going to Bitcoin Gold. So Bitcoin Gold runs on Zhash, and so you could expect the same Zhash numbers across the board. And these were extremely low, and you're going to see once we get down the flux what I mean. So we got 9 hashes per second on the A380 and 18 hashes per second on the A750. Normally your Zhash numbers are double that of your other Equihash coins, like Flux. Moving on, Dynex. Dynex works surprisingly well, especially on the A380. We get 250 hashes per second, and on the A750 we get 330 hashes per second. The A380 is definitely pretty good on Dynex, given that price point of 119, especially if you compare it to the A750. Moving on to Ergo. Ergo's where things get really weird. And so one of the things you gotta keep in mind is we are still very early on with the Intel Arc drivers and miner support, and you're gonna see wildly different numbers. So as an example for that, LOL miner was able to get 142 mega hashes per second on the A750. But if you notice, SRB miner only achieved 125 mega hashes per second. So there's still optimizations that need to be done between the two miners. And once again, kernels weren't available for Ergo on the A380 in either miner. Now, one of the advantages SRB miner does have over LOL miner is that all of the dual and triple mining actually works with the Intel Arc, where it doesn't in LOL miner. So we were able to do Ergo plus lithium, and this is where you're going to see we did not lose much hash rate compared to just Ergo. So in SRB miner, Ergo was 125. However, when we dual mined, it was 116, and on a lithium, we still got almost a gigahash a second. Right, so we were only like 30% less on the lithium hash rate from if we only did the core algo. However, in addition to that, we're getting 116 mega hash a second on Ergo, which is really nice. Similar with Casper. We've got 121 basically on both of those. Novo is another coin. You may not be familiar with Novo. However, it is mineable within SRB miner, and it is able to be mined on the Intel Arc GPUs. So we were able to get 110 mega hash with Ergo and 1.43 gigahash when we dual mine those. And then similar with if we add in Zil, this was one of the big drawbacks with SRB miner and we'll talk about this when we get done the ETHW, but it was only able to achieve 15.78 mega hash per second on the ETH hash algorithm, even though we got like 51 mega hash on ETC hash. So they have some optimizations they need to do with that. So look for this to improve in the very near future. Moving on to optical Bitcoin. So OBTC is very similar to Casper. So OBTC uses heavy hash, where Casper uses a variant of heavy hash. And so those hash rates are going to be very similar. Again, both around 121 mega hash per second each. Radiant being dual mined, we're looking at 120 mega hash per second on Ergo and 238 mega hash on Radiant. And then Ergo plus Zil, once again, 125 mega hash and only 15 on the Zil side, and that's mainly due to the ETH hash optimizations that need to happen. Moving on to ETC. ETC was mineable on Nano Miner and SRB Miner. However, it did not work on LOL Miner. It caused frequent crashes on LOL Miner, sometimes even just during the DAG generation. So personally, I would stick with probably SRB Miner. But here we can see the numbers. And ETC was mineable on the A380 in both miners. So we were looking at around 14.5 mega hash, and then right around 51 mega hash per second on the A750. And if we take a look at the Zil, once again, we were able to achieve that full hash rate when we were doing Nano Miner there. Moving on to, oh, and one thing I did want to mention, SRB Miner was not able to dual mine ETC with other algos. It just would not work. It ended up erroring out on the kernel. And so you can do it with Ergo, or if you want to do ETC dual, then with Zilliqa you would have to do it in Nano Miner, or use something like EasyMe that acts as a proxy. Moving on to ETHW. Now the ETHW hash rates, these are going to be the same for all ET hash algos, whether you're doing Etho protocol or anything like that, Callisto. These all kind of fit in that same range. So with Nano Miner, we got 50.8, which was the same as the ETC hash rate, which is good. However, with SRB Miner, we were only able to obtain 15.78 on that, and that applies to ZIL as well. And again, comes down to those optimizations, and unfortunately, the memory issue that we're running into, or not all the VRAMs available to the miner, we were not able to mine on the A380s at all with ETHW. Now, Callisto, those other ones, those will mine, and those will all mine at that 14.5 megahash per second. Another one that is supported that isn't too common is Evermore. And that one worked with Nano Miner. And on the A380, we got 5.7 megahashes per second. On the A750, we got 21.3 megahashes per second. That one was dual mineable with ZIL on both cards. And so with that, we're looking at 5.7 for Evermore and 14.6 for ZIL on the 380. And on the 750, we're looking at that full 51 megahash per second on ZIL. Next up is Firo. And once again, normally Firo would be mineable on that 6 gig card. However, we have that memory issue going on right now, so we weren't able to mine on that. However, we did get 12.36 megahash per second on the A750, which is a little bit less than what I was expecting. Once we get down to the Raven results, you're going to see a big difference between those. I was hoping to be closer to the results that we got on Raven. Next up is Flux. Flux was mineable on LOL Miner, and on the A380 it was only 12.8 sols a second, and on the A750 it was 23 sols per second. So not really that great on the Flux hash rate compared to a lot of other cards. Next up is Ironfish. This was surprisingly high. And so Ironfish is a coin that is getting ready to go to mainnet soon. I think in 2 weeks or so. And so one of the nice things with SRB Miner is it supports the Intel Arc on it, and it does a really nice hash rate. So we got just under 900 megahashes per second on the A380, and we got almost 3.2 gigahash per second on the A750. Moving on down to Casper. So this is Casper solely by itself. With LOL Miner, we got 83.7 megahash on the A380 and 283 on the A750. And what you're going to see here is that SRB Miner was substantially better than LOL Miner. So on SRB Miner, it was 113 megahashes per second and on the A380, and on the A750, 388 megahashes per second. Moving down to Novo. If we mine just Novo, we got 602 megahash per second on the A380 and just above 2 gigahash on the 750. Optical Bitcoin, again, similar to Casper here. So we got 110 megahash per second on the 380 and just under 375 megahash per second on the A750. Moving on to Raven. On the A380, and these are all using Nano Miner. Nano Miner was the only one that I was able to get ProgPal working on. So Kapal, ProgPal, Variance, Firo, those types of coins. We got 6.1 megahashes per second on the A380 and just under 21 mega hashes per second on the A750. One thing I want to point out with this is when I look at these hash rates, the first thing that comes to mind is the A380 is a prime replacement for the RX 560s. And like even on the Radeon Pro side, like the WX 3200s, the hash rates are just slightly higher than those. It's still a low power card. It's a 75 watt TDP. So these are nice to see. I think my WXs were getting like 4.5 mega hash. So as a replacement, if you're just looking for a modern upgrade on your rig, replacing, RX 560s or 550s with A380 is probably not a bad thing to do. And then you can also mine it with ZIL. And so for ZIL, again, we were able to get the full hash rates in nanominer. So we got 14.6 on the A380 and just under 51 on the A750. And then moving on to Radiant. Once again, with SRB miner, we got 153 mega hash per second and just under 550 mega hash per second on the A750. Ubik is also mineable on LOL miner and SRB miner, and Ubik was originally ETHW coin, and they went through a few changes and basically spun up what they call Ubik hash. And so it is somewhat similar to ETC hash and ETHW with some variants there. And one of the weird things about this is we were able to get the full hash rate out of both miners. So we got 14.1 on the A380 and just under 51 on the A750. These miners are pretty much the same. You could take your pick on which one you want to use. And last but not least, one of my favorite coins, Vertcoin, and VertHash miner did work. The A380, we got 300 kilohashes per second. The A750, we got 964 kilohashes per second. If you adjust the power limit and you move it a little bit, you can actually make this card more efficient than the 3070 on Vertcoin. So some nice numbers to see here. That gives you a general overview of the hash rates. Again, stock hash rates, really not able to tune things yet. And so this just kind of gives you, a high level of what you could expect from a hash rate perspective. Hopefully we get more support and more miners coming soon. For me personally, I am building a A750 rig and also an A380 rig. Both of those will be running Windows for the foreseeable future. If you do decide to get these cards, build a rig yourself, just make sure that your motherboard supports resizable bar. Most likely this will not work in any mining server cases. It probably won't work in octo miners. I have a few mining server cases that I had upgraded to i7s. However, there's no options in the motherboard to support resizable bar. Doesn't work. The RebTechs are not supported. You'll get video, but once you're in Windows, you get basically no video at all. Everything kind of cuts out once you're in Windows. Leave me a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on the hash rates on the Intel Arc. If you plan on getting any, let me know. And if you think that they're still overpriced, leave me a comment below. Let me know what you think, an optimal price for these cards would be.